Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. We will be spending a short bit of time going through what we're titling Cloud Defined, Real Risks Explained, How You Can Ensure Success. Again, all of this around thinking about cloud and what does it really mean? What are some of those risks? And again, let's give you a couple bits of information so that you can make some informed decisions and ensure your success. With me today is Christian Verstraat from HP. Again, my name is Todd DeCapua. I'm here at Shunra, lead our channel operations and services team. I have extensive consulting experience in senior leadership roles, both in IT development and IT infrastructure organizations, also a leader in application performance engineering. Christian is the chief technologist with HP's cloud strategy team, and he holds a worldwide role. Some of his responsibilities include the definition of HP's cloud functional and reference architectures, as well as the coordination of cloud activities across all of HP. So as you can imagine, I am thrilled to have Christian joining us today. He is also the linkage to the CTO community, both inside of HP and also externally to HP's customers and partners. So to get us kicked off here quickly, I wanted to just take a few moments to walk through what I've called the three divides of cloud. So this is an illustration which helps you to really begin to understand what is cloud. And again, it can be defined in many ways, but this is defining it as Christian and I look at it today and many of our customers, and also helping you to understand some of the real risks that are out there and you will face or you are facing today within cloud. So with the three divides, you can see at the bottom, these are the different ways that customers or users are accessing your environments. And again, this happens regularly today where maybe you're an enterprise user, so at your main headquarters, people are on a very high bandwidth, low latency condition network and accessing different types of systems and data sources. You can also see we've got the broadband user. So again, this could be somebody working from home, or a mobile user, which could be somebody working from Starbucks, an airport, pretty much anywhere at any time. So again, these three different users all accessing this system. And you can see that I've highlighted on the mobile user that that is a dynamic mobile network because, again, if you're in a Starbucks, maybe you're on the Wi-Fi. If you're in a major metropolitan city, maybe you do have a 3G connection. Maybe you've got a 4G connection. But as you would move different geographies, different locations, or the ups and the downs of the road, this is a constantly changing network condition. So again, just more things to think about and some of those risks explained for you. Where we now move into divide number two is where it gets to be pretty interesting and unique, especially around cloud. So this being a host environment, and again, we'll think about this as one cloud host environment. So here on the East Coast of the U.S., there are some fairly large cloud host environments in the state of New Jersey, as an example, and one of them is actually very, very large. So when I say large, it's roughly 3 square blocks by 2 square blocks. So just give yourself an idea of what the size of that physical building is. And when I walked into there, the first question that I had to ask their VP of Network Engineering was, how much cable do you have running throughout this facility? And where we ended up was roughly 10,000 miles of cable. And again, that is a significant and, as you can see here, for divide number two, rather impactful and a risk that you need to consider as you are moving or building an application that will run in the cloud. The reason being, again, depending on how many tiers within your application, depending on if this all lives in one cloud or multiple clouds around the globe, you know, what type of replication, just all kinds of other details. Irregardless, if it's all in one cloud host environment, you have 10,000 miles worth of cable in that one example. So now you have these different pieces of your system having to communicate across those. And again, worst case scenario, there's 10,000 miles worth of cable in between. And the challenge there is when you think about things like latency, you know, that's now needing to be built into that system and being able to operate, function, and perform under a high latent condition across and between the tiers. The divide number 3 is where you would now reach out beyond that cloud host to go to these distributed services. Many of these are cloud-based distributed services, which could be something like, in a financial application, doing a credit check lookup. So let's just kind of walk through each of these now that you've got a basic understanding of what the 3 divides of cloud are and how Christian and I are defining cloud. So as we step into the first one, again, this end user to the data center cloud host. We've already talked about things like these 3 different users, how it's all 3 different types. Again, each one of these having a different profile from a latency, a bandwidth, a packet loss, and a jitter. And again, the mobile user, this one is extremely variable as they would move just across geographies. And again, my experience is as I drive, it changes dramatically, even if I just go a few blocks down the street. So to highlight some of the risks associated with divide number 1 is you've got this diversity of the end user platforms. So again, I mentioned these changing connections, but you've also now got different types of platforms. Just in this image, you can see we've got somebody holding a mobile device. We've got a laptop. Again, today, irregardless of the industry, there's many different tools that people are using. So as we look at something like in logistics, a lot of different wireless and mobile devices are being used for tracking and shipping of packages, that just being another example. I was just on the phone with a customer, and they are actually testing for 1,400 different mobile device types. So now, in thinking about this diversity of the end-user platforms, not only do you have the different enterprise users, the different broadband users, and the mobile users, but now even within the mobile users, you have another 1,400 devices, not to mention the next one here, which is that dynamic mobile access of the network, which is causing applications to crash. So as that changes, the impact at that end user level, and again, now thinking about those 1,400 end users, platforms on the mobile user side, and those constantly changing network conditions. So again, this being another risk associated with cloud. Data center being improperly provisioned for those remote users. So as we would think about that cloud host environment, again, how is it that the front end is being secured? How is it that the amount of bandwidth is appropriately provisioned? And all of the other interworkings that are within that cloud host environment. But again, that immediate connection to these 3 different types of end users being the first place where provisioning can be an issue. So as we look at the second piece, now all within that cloud host environment, again, knowing that we're going to have 10,000 miles of cable, maybe more, maybe a little bit less, but the fact that that is the way that these environments are managed is to the benefit of that cloud host, so that they only need to have so much rack and so much space up and available and running. And those calculations to how that works does not take into consideration, again, how close you are to, for example, the front door of that cloud host environment, and the fact that you need to go across 8,000 or 10,000 miles of cable to get from your front end to your middle tier, and then you have to go again across another 5,000 miles, say, of cable to get to your back end data tier, to then have all that come back up again and go out to your end user, which, again, if they're on that mobile connection, you know, who knows what that's like, but all risks that need to be considered. So as we dive into the risks associated with number 2, or specifically that within the data center and cloud host, a few items that I'd want to highlight for you are the resource management of cloud results in change. So this fact that anytime, anywhere, for any period of time, that these resources will be moving around within that cloud host. So how is it that you're designing your applications for that? How is it that you're building your applications for that? How is it that you're testing your applications for that? So again, knowing that any of those, if we just look at a 3-tier application, any of them are going to be anywhere for any time, for any period of time. Rather scary proposition, but again, as you design, build, and test, you need to think about it. Build that in as part of your architecture. Number two, this 10,000 plus miles of cable in some providers, what does that impact of latency, bandwidth, packet loss, and jitter have on your end user experience and your cloud host environment, and maybe what provisioning you would need to specify for that cloud host environment? Lastly here, the SLOs that would exceed the architecture and application will absolutely underperform. Well, what happens to you? What happens to your customers? So I've heard a lot of people talk about getting cloud insurance for migrating to the cloud, and if you have issues, you have insurance to cover your losses. But this SLO is something very important to think about, that as you're moving into the cloud, or maybe as you're increasing your footprint into the cloud, you know, what happens when those SLOs are not met and underperform? What does that mean for you as an individual? What does that mean for you as an organization? And what does that mean for your customers? So again, just another risk that I want to throw out there so that you can be informed as you think about these different risks and maybe what you can do or what your organization could do to mitigate those. Lastly, again, highlighting this between the hosts or the hosts and these services. Again, thinking about these as maybe just distributed services, or they could be distributed services which live in the cloud. So as we look a little bit deeper into there are some specific risks that I wanted to highlight for you. These being service interactions are network dependent. So very real scenario in production. You know, I know that my service is going to be distributed, say, halfway across the United States. So being able to understand that and then recreate that as I build and design and build and test my application, I need to be able to take into consideration these network dependencies with those service interactions to ensure that prior to deploying it, that yes, I am going to be able to have my systems not only function but also perform well. Secondly, the availability of these external services causing transactions to hang. Again, something that we've seen many a times. Again, just the distributed nature, the poor provisioning, all these pieces where if it's all sitting in your lab and everything's connected together, no problems. But as soon as you move that into a distributed environment or a cloud-hosted environment, and you inject some significant changes which could cause some of your most important transactions to hang for your end customer. Lastly, network traffic exceeding those access characteristics. So again, many a times cloud hosts, the way that you pay for service is by bandwidth utilized. You can also classify the amount of bandwidth that you need or have available for peaks, as an example. But you know, what happens if this network traffic exceeds those access characteristics? And maybe it is because you have these three different types of users coming in, and you know, if your mobile users are on a poor connection, maybe you open up more connections than what you were expecting. But again, all of these different pieces factoring into these risks associated with your move to the cloud or building cloud-based applications, and something that, again, we wanted to share with you. So next, I want to hand it over to Christian. He will walk through and highlight a few quick slides for us. Christian, over to you.
Thank you, and thank you, Todd. We actually came out about a year ago with this book called Cloud Computing Beyond the Hype, because there's a lot of hype around cloud, but what is very important is that we actually understand what is happening and that we can have a dialogue with our customers about what they are really looking for, what they expect in and from their cloud and their cloud services. And so what you really want, and what we try to do in this book, is actually address many of the key points. Things like vendor lock-in, which is often one of the top discussions that are going on. Performance, the network performance talked about, but also the performance and the availability of the cloud itself, shadow cloud, and others. Because cloud, and in particular public cloud, is really an interesting beast. the writer actually quotes me in the book by saying that public cloud services is often like budget airlines. The price you're going to end up paying doesn't have any resemblance with the price that was on the website when you started. You all know what I'm talking about. Well, the same applies to cloud. There's a whole bunch of elements really to take into account. And the first one is really to decide what cloud or what clouds with an S do you decide specific workloads to run into. There are some things that you may want to put into a private cloud at your customer site because these are core functionality that really make your customer different. And they may want to keep that very, very close to their chest. But that obviously is going to imply that they do some investments, going to imply they do some building, going to imply they do some management. You may want to have some environments that you really put into the public cloud, that you make available through Amazon, through HP Cloud, through Rackspace, through any of those other public clouds. The problem with the public cloud is you really never know exactly where you are. Where is that data? Where is that information? Where is that functionality running? What are the security levels it's actually related to? What are the actual performance capability? What's the jitter around this? Again, to come back to some of the points that Todd made. Can you go in and audit those? No, you can't. That's why there is something in the middle, which we really call a managed cloud. And you may provide some of it. We do provide some of it. It acts like a public cloud in the sense that you do a pay-per-use, but you get a proper contract. You get a proper invoices. You get know exactly where your information is, in what data center it is. You may audit that data center. You get to know what the security aspects are. You have proper service level agreements. You get real support and not Twitter or anything like that. Make a choice and help your customers make a choice where they put what workload, because that's very, very important. And then when they make choices, make sure they go through every one of the different aspects that are actually related to those, and that they ask themselves the right questions. And I have my little cheat sheet. And this cheat sheet has 10 points, and I'm sharing them with you. I'm not going to go and discuss each and every one of those points in detail. Actually, I discussed them in one of my blog entries on my blog. And actually on my blog, if you go and look at, there is an 11th point that I'm not going to display to you right now, but that you can go and read. I discuss each and every one of those in much more details, and we'll give you the link to that blog post later on after this webinar. But where is the service delivered from? In what country will the data sit? Where is it? Is it on the East Coast, on the West Coast, in the center? You know? Secondly, who is involved? Particularly when you go with public clouds, you often have a supply chain. You're talking to one supplier, but that supplier uses other people. That's why when Amazon goes down, there's so many companies and so many services that are down. You have no clue that they're actually running on Amazon, but they are. You don't have any levels of transparency. These are things to take into account. And I could go on like that, but I'm not going to do it here for the sake of time. But it's important that we actually look and have those discussions and thoroughly go through each and every one of them and make sure that your customer feels happy with the supplier they choose on that particular behavior. So let me now hand back over to Todd to really continue walking you through the different aspects to take into account when you choose to implement clouds.
Great, thank you very much, Christian. I love how you hang that carrot out there for number 11. I need to remember that a little bit more.
Okay, and so, you know what number 11 is, but don't say to anybody.
I will not, absolutely. The thing that I did see as a theme there is every single one of those items that you've listed out. Again, how is it that companies are testing for those the little cheat sheet items. And, you know, the other common thread in thinking about all of this is how do you virtualize those networks? And if you actually get to a component level specification, as I've labeled it here, there's a few core pieces, or really three, that I know you and I have talked about a fair amount. But as you as a systems integrator want to help your customers move there, being able to discover all of these pieces. And when I talk about discover, there's three divides, and coming back to that and the network conditions that exist within each of those divides. So being able to capture those production network conditions like bandwidth, latency, jitter, and packet loss, to then be able to bring that into your test environment or your staging environment, or even earlier, you could bring it into your development environment for that matter. But being able to emulate that, so testing these applications with those virtualized production network conditions so that you will know how your applications will perform once they are moved to the cloud. The last piece here, which I would be remiss if I did not mention it, because we all have all the war stories to see how things do not perform well as they would be moved to the cloud. So being able to get automated analysis and optimization recommendations specifically related to performance before you deploy and before that poor performance affects your customers' users is a critical component. And we all know that, you know, development and testing, it's all a very cyclical process. So as I would look through these three, again, discovering those production network conditions, then being able to recreate those conditions in your lab, also doing some of the what-if scenarios, so that where Christian had mentioned, you know, things like disaster recovery and the dependencies on the other services that are, you know, removed from the one that maybe you're getting your cloud service from. But how is it that your application will be resilient in those scenarios? And then lastly, providing you with the real-time information to optimize your applications to perform over those poor network conditions that you're going to be exposing your applications to, so that, again, your customers' customers don't have negative impacts. So next, in preparation for this, Christian had actually shared an article, and I think it was maybe from a month and a half or 2 months ago. And, you know, within this, I know, Christian, you've read through it, and you had a couple key findings that you wanted to share.
So basically what those guys did is they, over a period of a week, they actually ran a number of performance tests on virtual environments, equivalent virtual environments in 5 different clouds: Amazon EC2, Rackspace, OpenStack Cloud, HP Cloud, SoftLayer, and Windows Azure. And they looked at 2 things. They looked at the performance, and they looked at the consistency of the performance over time. The whole of that over a period of 5 days. Because we all discuss and buy a small server or a medium server or a large server or an extra large server. But are we actually buying the same? Well, what it turns out of the study is we aren't. Really interestingly enough, the fastest one, the one with the highest performance, is Windows Azure, closely followed by HP Cloud. Windows Azure is actually about 5 times, on a performance level, 5 times faster than Amazon EC2, for a price which is reasonably similar, giving it 3 times better price performance than Amazon. And by the way, Amazon wasn't the worst. The worst turned out to be Rackspace in this particular space. But it's really interesting to see that you don't get the same for the same price. We're speaking about different things for a given price. And that, again, is something that you need to understand and that your customers need to understand, is not everything is equal in the cloud space.
That's a great point, Christian, and, you know, one that, you know, I think, you know, I've had an opportunity to pick up the book that I know Michael Bishop played a big role in helping Paul, the author, bring to market, as well as yourself, but with HP Press, and specifically the HP Technology series, cloud computing beyond the hype. I mean, just looking at that example that you shared earlier and the quote that you had in the book of, the budget airlines, it kind of follows up also one of the main visuals, I guess, that I took away in reading this article, which is, cost plus the performance that you get equals the value. And I think as you and I are out and we're working with a variety of different, CTOs, CIOs across industries, across the globe, we first hear about the IT need and the IT benefit that they see, but then very quickly it turns into a business dialogue. And I think what you and I have found is, yes, all of those are important, and we also have to look at what is that end customer value that they get, and thinking about the value and performance as it would relate also to the business and IT are kind of the critical elements that, again, as people are working with their customers to migrate to the cloud or take advantage of the cloud, all of these factors need to be taken in. So I think this article was great because it's, all within the last month and a half of this study, but then also that book, Cloud Computing Beyond the Hype, helped to outline many of these different factors to consider. I come back to the three divides and specifically asking this question of how are you, building requirements in a way that considers these three divides, especially if it's around an application that either is going to be deployed or is already deployed into a cloud environment. How are you designing and architecting your solutions? And again, as we think about these different divides, we think about injecting constant change of, they could be moved anywhere for any period of time, at any time, and having that additional latency and maybe bandwidth restrictions involved. How is it that you are doing functional testing by bringing all those pieces of that environment into the mix? How is it that you're doing your performance testing? Again, being able to set up these different types of end users, driving traffic and load into your test environment, which would represent this cloud environment and have the three divides recreated in there reflective of your production environment. How can you remediate the risks? So the risks that Christian and I have been able to highlight for you, what is it that you're proactively doing today so that you don't have those happen to you tomorrow? All this to help you to ensure the success not only of your organization, but also you as an individual. In closing, wanted to provide two reference links, one being other resources that you can see here out on the Shunra website, the other one being the Education Center that we've made available for you, also including my contact details and Christian's. You can see here our Twitter handles are listed. Please let us know how we might be able to be a better assistance to you as you're helping to understand and define what the cloud is, what those real risks are, and an explanation around them, and ensuring the success not only for your organization, but also for you. Thanks again for joining us today. This concludes our webinar.